Hello, everybody. Welcome back. You should have just taken a look at your deep thoughts and summarized the three different approaches to conflict and get started here. Let's get ready. What we're going to talk about here in this video is inaction. So, so far we've talked about what responses the Security Council can make, but often the response of the Security Council is to do not very much, and there are reasons for that. Again, things we've already talked about. You've got these five powerful members, and to get them to agree on doing something in another country, that can be kind of difficult, right? Um, so inaction is something that is probably the most likely course of action. Even just think about your personal lives and like your day. The easiest thing to do is nothing. And hopefully during this COVID shutdown, that is not the default mode that you're going to. Hopefully you're doing stuff. You're getting out for a walk. You're going to school. You're talking with your friends on FaceTime. You're cooking dinners for your family, all that kind of stuff. But the easiest thing to do is to just do nothing and to just veg, right? And sure, why is the Security Council any different? And so you got to think about like, well, why does nothing happen? And the reason is that, well, there's lots of different reasons, but one reason is that the status quo and doing nothing actually benefits your country. So, for example, if you look at the Congo, there's a lot of conflict in the eastern part between these different militia groups, and Canada or the United States actually benefit by that conflict because it artificially deflates the price of cobalt, something that we use in our smartphones, and you'll remember that from grade 10 too, where our transnational corporations and our consumers benefit from that conflict. And so there's actually a disincentive or a reason not to do it, not to intervene. Um, Now, in some cases, political leaders will argue that intervening doesn't immediately or directly benefit us. So I've got a link for you here that's to a video if you were in my class in 10. And if you weren't, I'm sure you probably saw a video like this anyways, where Bill Clinton, who was the president at the time of the Rwandan genocide, says that the United States will not get involved in other countries unless it directly benefits us and unless it involves our national interest. So now I think that that's an argument that politicians will make. I do want to give the other side though. So the other side might say, well, look, this is a really short-sighted view. Actually, getting involved in genocides like Rwanda is important for Canada in the long term because Canada is a trading nation. We have 35 million people. We are not large enough to go it alone on the international stage. We're a northern country. We need to trade. And Canada benefits from having trading partners who are reliable and believe in liberal democracy, just like Canada does, right? This idea of having free markets, but also these democratic institutions that benefits us. Just look at how our trading relations have been hurt by dealing with authoritarian regimes. So, for example, right now, because of a diplomatic row between Canada and China, Canadian farmers can't sell their canola oil in China, right? We can't sell that product. So, if China were a democratic country, it's unlikely that there would be any disagreement between Canada and China, and we would be able to sell those products. And so our farmers would benefit. And so there's another side to this which would say, look, this is a craven political decision that's being made because actually, in the long term, if we really see getting involved in these genocides, it does benefit us because it means that people will be free. They won't be living under authoritarian regimes, and that benefits us, not only economically, but in our safety and security. What good does it do to have an authoritarian regime repressing their people, and that repression could ultimately come back to affect our lives, whether we live or die, right? So um, what I'm trying to say is there are arguments against it, but that's what political leaders will tell us is they'll say, oh, well, it doesn't directly influence us, so we shouldn't get involved. It's not worth it. Um, and in some cases, there are things where maybe political leaders and people in government, right? They want to get involved, but the public is apathetic and they don't really care, and they're not. It's not their number one concern. I mean, at the end of the day, in democratic countries, people make decisions about who they're going to vote for based on multiple factors. And although our concern for people in another part of the world might factor into that decision, political leaders know that it's usually not going to be a primary concern. And so then it's not something that they focus on, right? So people creating pressure can also help or cause governments to take action. And now, on the other side of it, sometimes inaction might actually be a good thing, guys. Like sometimes not doing anything could be the right decision. So if you think back again to grade 10, and you think about imperialism, imperialism was justified using the white man's burden, right? Like we need to go and conquer these people because we need to bring them up to the same level as us. So it seemed like they were doing something benevolent, but really they weren't. And so imperial powers can always use or try to find ways to justify their conflict, right? So perhaps doing nothing is actually the right thing to do in most circumstances, because perhaps the reason that we're getting involved is not the real reason or the most honest reason. The other thing you want to think about is lots of times humans do things that we think we're doing for a good reason, and it actually causes more problems in the end. So we think we're going to help a situation, and we actually make it a lot worse. And so there's a lot of examples of this, especially with the United States, where they would say, you know what, we're going to get involved in this country because we're going to support democracy and freedom. And by getting involved in that country, ostensibly to promote liberty and freedom, it actually generated a reaction against that. So it actually made people be more in favor of authoritarian forms of government. And so that's another issue with us. We think we know what we're doing, but we don't always know what we're doing. So before the second invasion of Iraq, there were important people in the government who said, like, we'll be greeted as liberators and people are going to thank us for getting rid of the dictator Saddam Hussein. And they were proven wrong. And the country descended into a decade of chaos in which tens of thousands of people died. People, Iraq used to be a decent place to live not so long ago. Now it's one of the worst countries to live on earth. So, people, we might think we're doing something for a good reason, but it actually might make things worse. So there's a lot of reasons why inaction could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, and that you want to think about these ideas. All right, so I've got a little video for you that I want you to watch. It's going to kind of give you some information on what's going on in Myanmar with the genocide that's happening there. Before you watch the video, just know like there is some graphic scenes of genocide. Um, Nothing like it's horrible and horrific and it's hard to watch, but nothing that's like worse than what you would have seen in grade 10 with Rwanda in terms of scenery or imagery. And I think it is important that you watch it to see like this is what's going on in another part of the world, and really the response from the rest of the world has been nothing. Condemnation will take away your Nobel Prize. Really small things around the edges here. So you're going to do eventually a project, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, or next week, really. And I think that this will sort of help you, and you might even use that as your case study that you're going to go ahead and do some research on. So I want you to take a look at that video. At the end of the video, I want you to think about why hasn't there been any intervention to stop the genocide in Myanmar? So we've talked about some reasons why a country or why the Security Council might authorize intervention in a country. But why hasn't there been very much done in Myanmar? Why, and even outside of the Security Council, again, remember that usually these things are through the Security Council, but a country like the United States or China or Russia, anybody could get involved. Canada could get involved. We could unilaterally decide to do something in Myanmar. We could get all of our NATO allies together and we could go and have a mission to stop the genocide in Myanmar. But that's not happening. So I want you to think about why amongst the international community hasn't there been intervention to stop this genocide? So that's one thing I'm going to get you to do. I'm just going to briefly describe the next bit as well, of what I'm going to get you to do. And that's because this is going to take a couple of minutes, and then you're going to watch some more videos too with this. So I want you to take a look at the Suez Crisis, which happened in 1956, as a case study for why the international community decides to get involved in conflicts in some cases and not involved in others, right? So Myanmar is your case where there's some inaction. Here's a case where you're going to see the international community get quite involved in this conflict. So you're going to watch two videos about the Suez Crisis. And as you're watching the videos, I'm going to go back to your Deep Thoughts document. You're going to fill out these, I think there's 5 questions about this case study. So, like, why was Egypt important to Great Britain, France, and Israel's national interest? In other words, why were they interested in what was happening within Egypt? Why did they care? Why did they care what was happening in another country? Okay. So you're going to watch the videos. You're going to answer those questions. There is a couple of notes about what you're going to see in these videos that it doesn't mention, that I think are important. The first is that it talks about at the beginning of the video how the Pasha of Egypt, how he had to sell Egypt's stake in the Suez Canal to be able to pay for his debts. The thing that it doesn't mention is that they convinced him to use his money to build the Suez Canal in the first place. So they told him, hey, use your money to build this canal. He built the canal using that money. He got an investment stake in the company. So he was supposed to be earning money off of the Suez Canal. And then because his debts were so much higher than what he was receiving in the investment, he was forced to sell his stake. And so obviously the French and the British were very happy to take his stake, and basically take over control of the canal. So it's sort of talked about, but the true story is kind of glossed over a little bit. Now, the second thing that's also not really mentioned is at the end of the crisis, one of the solutions is to have peacekeepers in Egypt and that is a solution that is brokered by our prime minister at the time. So Canada has a role in this story, and yeah. So what I'm going to get you to do is watch that video. You finish your deep thoughts, and then for this week, this is what you are submitting. Okay, so you're going to submit this, and then next week you're going to get the research project that we're going to ask you to do, looking at why does the international community decide to get involved in other nations' conflicts. All right, so hopefully you've been able to follow along. What we're trying to do this week is really make sure that in between each of the videos, you were actually doing something, and hopefully that broke it up a bit for you this week. And next week, you'll be doing all research on your own. So I'll be describing that in the next video, and that will get released next week. All right. Talk to you later. Have a good week. Um, Hopefully, you guys are staying safe, staying well. And if you need anything, obviously contact us, your teachers. We are your source of help. Again, also contact your friends. If you didn't understand something, there's a good chance they did. So that's another point of contact. And yeah, just stay in touch, be safe, be well, and we'll talk to you again soon. Okay.